It was a summer afternoon in Rio de Janeiro when Mariana Torres boarded the bus that would take her back home. The city was especially hot that day, with the sun beating down on the asphalt, making the air seem to vibrate with the oppressive heat. Mariana, at 45 years old, was a woman of striking presence. Her appearance always drew attention, not just because of her beauty, but because of the way she carried herself, exuding confidence and a certain air of superiority. She wore an elegant dress with a classic cut that accentuated her slender figure, and she carried a designer handbag in one hand. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, with every strand in its place, as if even the heat couldn't disturb it. Mariana was known for her strong personality and firm opinions. As a renowned lawyer, she was used to being listened to and respected, and she expected that from everyone around her. As she stepped onto the bus, Mariana cast a disdainful glance at the crowded interior. Most of the seats were taken, and the few people standing were struggling to keep their balance as the vehicle bounced along the uneven streets. She discreetly sighed, annoyed that there wasn't a seat available. With a look of displeasure, she grabbed the overhead bar, trying to avoid as much contact with the other passengers as possible. It was then that her eyes met those of João Carlos. He was standing next to her, also holding the bar, but with a serene expression on his face. João was 35 years old, dark-skinned, and wore a simple work uniform, indicating that he was employed in some manual labor job. His eyes, though tired, reflected a kindness and dignity that contrasted with his modest appearance. He was tall, broad-shouldered, but there was something gentle in his posture, as if he was always ready to make room for others. The bus began to move, and with the first jolt, Mariana, trying to keep her balance in her high heels, momentarily lost her footing and bumped into João. With quick reflexes, he extended his hand to help her from falling, but Mariana recoiled from him with a brusque gesture. "You could pay more attention," she snapped, her voice sharp enough to make the nearby passengers turn their curious gazes to the scene. João, surprised by her reaction, responded politely, in a low voice, "I'm sorry, ma'am. It wasn't my intention." But Mariana was not willing to accept the apology. Her eyes narrowed and her expression hardened. "Of course it wasn't," she retorted, with a tone that mixed disdain and irritation. "But people like you always end up getting in the way of others." The choice of words was deliberate, loaded with prejudice and scorn. The notion of "people like you" did not go unnoticed by João, nor by the other passengers. The silence that followed was dense, almost palpable, as everyone waited to see how he would react. But João, instead of responding, simply lowered his head slightly, in a gesture that was more resignation than submission. Mariana, however, seemed to want more than just a passive reaction. Her dissatisfaction with the lack of response was evident on her face. She felt the need to reaffirm her position, to make sure everyone there knew who was in control. "People like you should walk instead," she continued, her voice now louder, drawing more passengers' attention. "This kind of carelessness only hinders those who have places to be, decent work to do." Some passengers began murmuring among themselves, and while some looked at Mariana with disapproval, others seemed to silently agree with her words, fueling the discomfort in the air. João, however, remained silent. He had learned, over the years, not to react to provocations like this. Life had already taught him the value of silence in situations where a person's dignity was being tested. Mariana's words didn't surprise him, but they also didn't affect him as she might have hoped. For João, it was just another episode of prejudice, something he had faced many times before. As the bus continued its route, the situation grew increasingly tense. Mariana couldn't understand how João could simply accept the insults without reacting. This irritated her even more. She felt that her superiority was being challenged by the man's unshakable calm. "That's why this country is the way it is," she continued, now directing her words to everyone around. "Because people like him only know how to live off handouts and get in the way of others' lives." This time, there was a response. An older man, sitting a little further ahead, shook his head in disapproval and murmured, "That's not how you talk to people, ma'am. Respect is for everyone." Mariana ignored him, but João briefly lifted his eyes and looked at the man with a glance of silent gratitude. The public humiliation Mariana was trying to inflict on Joao wasn't having the desired effect, and this left her even more frustrated. The bus continued its journey, passing through the increasingly busy neighborhoods of the city. The tension inside the vehicle had not yet eased. Mariana, realizing she had lost the interest of some passengers, fell silent, but her gaze was still full of contempt. When the bus finally reached her stop, Mariana cast one last look of disdain at Joao before quickly exiting, not even thanking the driver. She stepped off the bus with her chin raised, as if to make it clear that, to her, the situation had been nothing more than a minor inconvenience in her day. Joao watched as the bus doors closed and it continued on its way. He let out a long sigh, relieved to finally be able to breathe in peace, but at the same time, feeling the weight of the words he had heard. Joao knew that this experience wasn't unique, but it still hurt. He leaned against the handrail and looked out the window, trying to find some solace in the passing scenery. The silence that followed on the bus was a stark contrast to the tension that had filled the previous moments. The passengers returned to their routines as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But Joao knew that, for him, that day had been different. Mariana's words, though they hadn't broken him, had awakened something in him, something he wasn't ready to face, but he knew was inevitable. At that moment, as the bus continued towards its final destination, Joao began to wonder if the life he was living was really the one he wanted to continue living. And it was with these thoughts weighing on his mind that he decided that maybe it was time to make a change. The bus continued its journey, but the atmosphere inside was still heavy with the weight of Mariana's words. Joao Carlos, now in complete silence, tried to process what had just happened. The public humiliation, though painful, was not new to his life. Over the years, he had learned to endure such insults in silence. But that day, something inside him began to stir, an unease he could no longer ignore. Joao was a man of few words, someone who always believed that his actions spoke louder than any speech. He had grown up in a humble family, but one rich in values. His father, a hardworking man, always taught him the importance of dignity, honesty, and respect for others, regardless of how they treated him. These lessons were forged in the harsh realities of life, where Joao learned that silence was often his best defense against the world's cruelty. As the bus bumped along the pothole-ridden streets of Rio de Janeiro, Joao was transported back to the past, to memories he had buried deep. He remembered his childhood in a poor neighborhood where racism and social inequality were part of everyday life. From a very young age, he understood that the world was unjust, but he also learned to fight for what he believed was right. Joao's father was a bricklayer, and his mother was a domestic worker. They worked tirelessly to provide a dignified life for their children. As the eldest, Joao always felt the weight of responsibility. He would accompany his father on small jobs, learning the trade, and gradually began to realize how difficult it was to earn an honest living. Even so, his father never gave in to despair or the temptation to take an easier path. A man's dignity lies in what he does, not in what others say about him, his father used to say. These words became a mantra for Joao, guiding him in every decision he made. Over the years, Joao excelled in his studies and earned a scholarship to study civil engineering at a public university. He was one of the few black students in his class and faced prejudice from many classmates and even some professors. But with fierce determination, he graduated and decided to start his own construction company. With a lot of effort, his company began to grow, and Joao was finally able to provide a better life for his family. But success brought with it new challenges. Joao found himself in a ruthless business world where competition was fierce, and it wasn't always easy to maintain the values he had learned at home. He prided himself on his integrity, but at the same time, he felt the pressure to grow, to expand his business, and to stay relevant in an increasingly competitive market. It was during this period that tragedy struck. A car accident took the lives of his wife and daughter, plunging Joao into a spiral of pain and despair. The loss consumed him completely. The company, which had been the pride of his life, was set aside. Joao could no longer focus. His mind was dominated by grief. He sank into a deep depression, and gradually, he lost everything he had built. The company went bankrupt, he had to sell the house, and he ended up alone, with nothing but memories of a past he preferred to forget. Now, working as a janitor in a commercial building, João lived a modest but dignified life. He had accepted his new reality with resignation, believing that life had given him what he deserved. But the words Mariana had spoken on that bus awakened feelings he thought he had overcome. The anger, resentment, and sadness returned with full force, and he could no longer ignore them. As the bus moved on, João began to question his own life. He had become accustomed to living in the shadow of the past, accepting his fate without a fight. But now, he was beginning to realize that maybe it was time to face his demons and seek a way to redeem himself, to find a new purpose. The bus continued its route, leaving behind the wealthier neighborhoods of the city and entering the more humble areas. João knew that his stop was near, and with it, the need to make a decision. He could continue living as he was, accepting the humiliations and difficulties without complaint, or he could try to change, to rebuild his life, even if it meant facing the pain of the past once more. When the bus finally stopped, João got off, feeling the warmth of the sun on his face. He walked slowly through the downtown streets, absorbing the hustle and bustle around him. The noise of cars, the voices of people. Everything seemed distant, as if he were in a world apart, immersed in his own thoughts. As he entered the building where he worked, João was greeted by the usual greetings from his coworkers. They respected him, knew he was an honest and hardworking man. But few knew his true story. João never talked about his past with anyone, preferring to keep his pain to himself. As he gathered his cleaning supplies and prepared for another day of work, João made a decision. He didn't know exactly how or where to start, but he felt he needed to change, that he couldn't continue living in survival mode. Perhaps the first step was to try to reconnect with the people who once were part of his life. Or maybe it was to find a way to resume his studies. Or perhaps find a new purpose through community work. What João knew for sure was that the humiliation he had suffered on that bus would not be in vain. It had ignited a flame he thought was extinguished, and now, he was determined to find out where this new journey would lead him. Suddenly, the bus came to an abrupt stop. A group of young people entered abruptly, bringing an energy that contrasted with the heavy atmosphere. They laughed loudly and filled the few remaining spaces, unconcerned with the disapproving looks from others. Mariana, feeling even more uncomfortable, sighed in disdain. One of the young men, noticing her attitude, approached her, feigning innocence. "Is everything okay, ma'am?" he asked with a mischievous smile. "You seem nervous." "That's none of your business," Mariana retorted sharply. The young man laughed and moved away, but the situation did not go unnoticed by the other passengers. João observed everything in silence, his eyes alert to every movement. The tension in the bus was rising, and then something unexpected happened. One of the young men, noticing that João was being targeted by insults, decided to intervene. He approached Mariana and said in a challenging tone, "Do you think you can talk to people like that just because you're white and rich?" Mariana was taken aback by the young man's boldness. She tried to defend herself, but he cut her off. "You know what? People like you, who think they're superior, aren't worth anything. The world doesn't need more hate." He looked at João and then at the other passengers. "This guy here, at least he's minding his own business, not bothering anyone. But you just spread poison." Mariana was left speechless, and the entire bus fell silent. João, however, remained quiet, watching the situation unfold. The young man's intervention caused other passengers to start murmuring, many of them agreeing with his words. It was then that the bus driver, who had remained silent until that moment, decided to intervene. He stopped the bus, turned to the passengers, and said, "Enough! I'm not going to allow this kind of behavior on my bus. If you can't respect others, you can get off at the next stop." Mariana was indignant, but she realized that she was alone in this situation. No one defended her, and her anger was replaced by a feeling of humiliation. When the bus stopped at the next point, she, still with a closed expression, quickly got off, not looking back. After Mariana's departure, the atmosphere on the bus began to calm down. João, still standing, felt a momentary relief, but his mind was far from there. The young man who had confronted her gave João a pat on the back, saying, "Don't let people like that get to you, man. Life's too short to waste time on those who don't matter. João nodded in thanks, but remained silent. When the bus reached his destination, he got off and walked slowly through the city center streets, his memories taking him back to the past. Years ago, João was a promising businessman. He had a small construction company, which had grown rapidly thanks to his hard work and integrity. He had a loving family, a wife, and a daughter, who were the center of his life. However, everything changed when a tragic car accident took the lives of his wife and daughter. The pain of the loss was so great that João couldn't move forward. He abandoned the company, sank into a deep depression, and gradually lost everything he had built. Now, working as a janitor, he was trying to find some meaning in his life. But the weight of the past still haunted him. The humiliation he suffered on the bus brought back feelings he thought he had long buried. João began to realize that perhaps it was time to face his demons and try to rebuild his life. With these thoughts, he entered the building where he worked. The day was still early, and he had a long journey ahead of him. But that day, something inside João had changed. He knew that somehow, that public humiliation would be the starting point for something bigger in his life. Days passed since the incident on the bus, but Mariana's words echoed in João's mind. He couldn't forget the humiliation, but he also couldn't ignore the feeling that something needed to change in his life. Determined to confront his fears and traumas, João began to seek ways to rebuild his life. It was then, on a sunny morning, as he was leaving work, that João ran into an old friend, Carlos, who had been his partner in his business days. Carlos, who had also gone through hardships, was surprised to see João in that state. They talked for hours, and Carlos revealed that he was trying to revive their old company but needed help. João, initially reluctant, began to consider the idea. The conversation with Carlos reminded him of who he was and what he was capable of. He decided it was time to get back to work, not just for himself, but also in memory of his wife and daughter. As João began planning his return to the business world, Mariana was also facing her own battles. After the bus incident, she started to realize that something was wrong in her life. As much as she tried to hide it, Mariana knew that her behavior on the bus had been shameful. She had always been a strong woman, but that experience made her question her choices and values. Over time, Mariana began to realize that her behavior was a reflection of her own unhappiness. She was a successful woman, but lonely, and her professional success didn't fill the void in her personal life. She decided to seek help to understand the root of her bitterness. João and Carlos began working together again, trying to rebuild the company that had once been prosperous. Little by little, João regained his confidence and passion for work. The business began to thrive, and João felt that he was finally on the right track. Mariana, on the other hand, started therapy, trying to deal with her internal issues. Therapy helped her understand that her aggressive and prejudiced behavior was a way of coping with her own pain and insecurity. Gradually, she began to change, becoming more open and empathetic. One day, by a twist of fate, João and Mariana crossed paths again, this time in a completely different context. João, now a recovered businessman, was attending a business event, and Mariana, as a lawyer, was there representing one of her clients. When their eyes met, they both felt tension in the air. Mariana, recalling the incident on the bus, felt embarrassed, while João looked at her with a mixture of surprise and indifference. However, something had changed in both of them. João was no longer the submissive and humiliated man, and Mariana was no longer the arrogant and prejudiced woman. The interaction between them was brief but significant. João noticed that Mariana was different, and it made him think about how life can change people in unexpected ways. As time passed, João and Mariana began to meet more frequently at professional events. They still remembered what had happened on the bus, but they didn't talk about it. There was a silent understanding between them, an unspoken truce. It was during one of these encounters that the truth finally came to light. In a casual conversation, Mariana, in a moment of vulnerability, confessed to João that she was undergoing a personal transformation. She talked about her therapy sessions and how she was trying to change her outlook on life. João, in turn, shared his own story, talking about the loss of his family and how it had profoundly affected him. He spoke about his journey of rebuilding and how he was trying to find a new purpose in life. The conversation was sincere and filled with emotions. Both realized that, in different ways, they were trying to atone for their mistakes and find a new path. João and Mariana began to meet more frequently, now not just at work events, but also in social situations. Gradually, an unlikely friendship began to form between them. They found comfort in each other, sharing their stories and learning together about forgiveness and change. For João, being around Mariana was a constant reminder of how people can change. He saw in her a determination that he had once despised but now respected. Mariana, on the other hand, found in João a source of inspiration, someone who had faced pain and overcome adversity. Both knew that the past could not be erased, but they also understood that the future was still in their hands. They began planning projects together, using their complementary skills to help the local community. João, with his business experience, and Mariana, with her legal knowledge, formed an unexpected but effective partnership. As João and Mariana continued working together, something unexpected happened. During a business meeting, one of João's former employees appeared. It was a man he had fired years ago after a financial embezzlement that nearly bankrupted the company. This man, named Alberto, had harbored resentment towards João and was determined to get revenge. Alberto, who now worked for a competitor, used insider information to sabotage João and Mariana's new venture. He managed to manipulate documents and evidence to make it seem like João was involved in illegal activities. When the news broke, it was a shock to everyone, especially to Mariana, who, as a lawyer, knew that the accusations could destroy everything they had built. João, however, remained calm. He knew he was being framed, and with Mariana's help, he began to investigate the case. The situation became more complicated when Alberto started threatening to expose João's past, including the personal tragedy he had tried to leave behind. It was then that Mariana had a bold idea. She decided to use her influence and contacts to uncover the truth behind the accusations. During the investigation, she discovered something that would change everything. Alberto was actually connected to a corruption scheme involving several companies, including João's former company. The revelation was shocking. Mariana and João realized they had been manipulated from the start. Alberto wasn't just trying to get revenge on João. He was trying to cover up his own crimes. With this new information, they were able to expose Alberto and clear João's name. With Alberto exposed and arrested, João and Mariana finally breathed a sigh of relief. The experience brought them even closer, and both realized how much they had changed since the day they met on the bus. João, now a respected businessman, had rediscovered his passion for life and work. Mariana, on the other hand, had transformed into a more compassionate and empathetic person, leaving behind the prejudices that had once defined her. In a final conversation, João and Mariana talked about what they had learned throughout their journey. They understood that life is full of ups and downs, and that people can change if they have the courage to confront their mistakes and seek redemption. As they walked together through the streets of Rio de Janeiro, where it all began, João and Mariana knew that despite their differences, they now shared something much deeper. The understanding that true strength lies in acknowledging our weaknesses and using the lessons of the past to build a better future.